Hey everybody, how are you? I hope you're good. I hope you're very good. I'm gonna keep it a little business tonight. So I will go ahead and pull up our fire and invite you to relax. Looks like Gus is about to put his head down. He just had a big stretch. And you can let go of today because gratefully this day is over. And tomorrow is a new one. So let's go ahead and put the fire. And just a second. And I will share this fire with you. Here we go. Okay. Oops, let's do that. See if it will work. Great. Okay. Awesome. Okay. Well, I am really grateful for the few of you here. Okay, let's go ahead and get into it. We are reading Chapter 9 of Rachel Maddow's recent book, Prequel, about the rise of American fascism. I did put a disclaimer on the screen because there are definitely some passages that are very difficult because of the historical reference to anti-Semitism and the war and other bigotry, and because there are many quotations within the book, oftentimes there will be what are slurs, but were used with more frequency in public. And so I try to avoid saying those words, and I apologize if anyone is ever concerned or hurt by the language. I do recommend that you consume this with caution, as it can be. It is a very difficult topic. It's also a very, very important topic. So I think it is worthy of our time. So please sit back and relax. Chapter 9. Probably 10 times more. George Dethridge's heart might have skipped a beat when he sighted the flag flapping high atop Embassy Row in northwest Washington, D.C. on a cool day in February 1939. Flag had been adopted officially less than 4 years earlier, but was already among the most recognized national symbols in the world. The banner sported a bold red background as a field, with a white circle at its center, and inside that circle, in black, a swastika. Quote, "As it brought Germany out of the depths of despair," Dethridge had recently exclaimed to a small, rabid audience of Americans, "so it will bring the United States." As Dethridge neared the ostentatiously turreted, red brick German embassy, he entered a Nazi safe space, owing more to American diplomatic imperatives than to German security precautions. The U.S. Congress had recently, by legislation, cordoned off discrete protest-free zones, each with a radius of 500 feet, where it was unlawful to wave signs or placards, or the like designed or adapted to intimidate, coerce, bring into public odium any foreign government, party, or organization, or to bring into public disrepute its political, social, or economic acts or views, or to intimidate, coerce, harass, or bring into public disrepute any diplomatic or consular representatives, or to congregate and refuse to disperse after being ordered to do so. Close quote. The new law, inserted into the municipal codes of the District of Columbia, protected every foreign embassy and consulate in Washington. But it's not like Americans were frequently enraged enough to go protest on the diplomatic doorstep of the Swiss or the Ecuadorians. The impetus for the law had planted on the simmering American feelings about the Nazis who were now in charge of the German delegation. In the late 1930s, though, those feelings were still at only a low boil in the United States. The Nazi annexation of Austria drew 25,000. Oh, am I? I'm sorry. It's probably just I'm a little stuffed up. Let me try and turn it and tell me if it's better. The Nazi annexation of Austria drew 25,000 demonstrators in London in March 1938, but did not spawn major protests in Washington. Neither did Hitler's annexation of the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia 6 months later. The true test came several weeks later, in November 1938, when a Polish teenager, Herschel Greenspun, an anemic-looking boy with brooding black eyes, decided enough was enough. Herschel read the newspapers, and all that he could read filled him with dark anxiety and wild despair, explained Dorothy Thompson, the famous American reporter, who had been closely following the German threat in Europe. He read how men, women, and children had been forced to cross the border into Czechoslovakia on their hands and knees, and then ordered out of that dismembered country, that, shorn of their richest lands and factories, did not know how to feed the mouths that were left. He read that Jewish children had been stood on platforms in front of a class of German children, and had had their features pointed at and described by the teacher as marks of a criminal race. The teenager walked into the German embassy in Paris and shot dead the third secretary. Young Herschel was thrown into jail to await trial. A postcard he had written to his parents was confiscated. "May God forgive me," it said. "I must protest so that the whole world hears." The Nazi used Herschel Grunspann's crime in Paris as justification to put the match to a fuse they had been very eager to light. On the night that the German diplomat expired in Paris, November 9, 1938, mobs of marauders in Germany, Austria, and the German-occupied Sudetenland, some official police and military, some not, laid waste to families, communities, businesses, and institutions simply because they were Jewish. News of Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass, splashed around the globe. The German gangs had burned or dynamited synagogues by the dozens, looted or destroyed Jewish businesses, confiscated millions of dollars worth of assets, cash, securities, personal property, art, even furniture and toys. Germans murdered hundreds of Jews that night, beat and raped others. Quote, extensive demonstrations, the rebels called the vicious attacks. He refused to ask for calm for 12 long hours, by which time the mobs had exhausted themselves. I'll stop there and make the commentary that when turned loose, the mobs served the purpose of demagogue. And it's the same thing we saw on January 6th. So you need to be making more comparisons between the patterns of behavior of leaders and how propaganda has brought us back to this point in history in many ways. Not to be alarmist. Goebbels blamed the Jews for inciting this atrocity against themselves, then announced he would levy a fine against the German Jewish community at large, an astounding $400 million to cover the damages. Even after the news of that harrowing night made front-page headlines in the United States, the area around the German embassy in Scott Circle in Washington, D.C. remained relatively calm. Fewer than 100 members of the League for Peace and Democracy showed up to raise their placards and their voices at the embassy the next day, and the entirety of their 60-minute demonstration unfolded at a safe distance, behind chalk-marked lines 500 feet from the 4-story building, proudly displaying its swastika flag. The protesters abandoned their plan to fly kites with anti-Nazi slogans, and the local police explained that, too, was illegal within the District of Columbia and would cost them $10 for every offending kite they flew. The earthbound placards noted by local reporters seemed both deeply correct and also feeble in the face of the terror and devastation the Nazis had visited on hundreds of thousands of innocent human beings in a single night. Resist fascist terror. Boycott German goods. Lift the arms embargo. Appease fascism? Why not tickle tigers? On a quiet day, 3 months later, George Dethridge stepped over those faded chalky markings 500 feet from the German embassy and into the safe zone. The 45-year-old sometime construction engineer and full-time political activist was 6 feet 4 inches tall and a solid 205 pounds. Impressive girth for an American man in the days before high-fructose corn syrup. Dethridge was combative by nature and girded by a thoroughgoing certainty in his cause, a faith in both the correctness of his views and the urgency of his mission. He saw himself as a red-blooded, real American patriot, dedicated Christian, a fierce protector of white Western civilization. He had looked around, studied and researched the situation for himself, and here's how it looked in his benighted view. The commies were on the march everywhere, not least in his own country. They had already begun to pollute all that was great and good about the United States, and the Jews were behind them. Something had to be done. Now was how Dethridge saw it, before it was too late. That's why he showed no hesitation in waltzing up to the German embassy without appointment or letter of introduction, but with the expectation that he would get an audience. Well, we are all brothers in race and culture, devoting our lives to a common cause, Dethridge had recently written in a Nazi-owned international news service, a cause which ultimately must mean the salvation of the world for Christian and Aryan people. Close quote. Dethridge's arrival, he proudly announced himself as the person, quote, raising all this hell around the United States, presented a bit of a problem at the embassy, a problem that struck and a philosophical and ideological conflict that split its staff right down the middle in 1939. German officials in the United States knew all about George Deatherage, just as they'd been tracking fascist public intellectuals like Lawrence Dennis. Nazis had been tracking ultra-right American activists like Deatherage for years. When a political agent of the Third Reich in the United States submitted a report to Hitler himself in the summer of 1937, titled Achieving Collaboration of Germans with the National Men of America on Behalf of Both Countries, he singled out James True, the wildly anti-Semitic Pennsylvania Republican Congressman Louis T. McFadden, Father Charles Coughlin, William Dudley Pelley, and George Deatherage. The fascist publications this group spewed every week, quote, "You can help save America, yourself, and your family from the folly of other nations by making the truth known to your friends," were seen by the Nazis as helpful to their cause. There was already an effort afoot in Berlin to help widen their distribution. The author of the Achieving Collaboration report even boasted of having introduced Deatherage to Manfred von Killinger, the very aggressive German consul in San Francisco. Von Killinger had been in the loop on the planned mass murder of prominent Jews contemplated by Henry Allen and his cohort in Los Angeles. Tom, how are you? I don't, no problem. You too, don't go. I think there's just a lot going on, Tom. That's okay. Any? Sorry, just a second. Many in the German embassy in Washington wanted to steer clear of the rogue Americans altogether. These were long-serving professionals of their country's foreign office, schooled in diplomatic subtleties. They did not necessarily share the enthusiasm for the Führer's food program. Excuse me. Stuffy. But it was their sworn duty to give Adolf Hitler the chance to realize whatever destiny he had dreamed up for himself and the fatherland. This meant, on a practical, on a practical level, in early 1939, doing all they could to keep the United States out of the growing conflict in Europe. The Führer was setting in motion. I just want to stop there too, because basically what we learned about last night tonight was that part of what the fascists in the United States did was try to stop us from getting involved in the war in order to really help Germany. And it feels very similar to people that may profess anti-war sentiments around the Ukraine war. And some of that could be, that's another area that strikes me as something similar. Oh, let's have some weed break. The fear was setting in motion oh, excuse me. Let me come back. Fear was setting in motion the war machine he had been building. Sorry. I think I'm going to cut it short tonight. But we'll do it again. Sorry, I don't know what this is.